Hello, everyone. I am Ananya Ivaturi, and welcome to the Sincerely Your Soul podcast, where I aim to ease the conversation surrounding everyday struggles and mental illnesses. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the podcast. So, obviously, by today's title, you know exactly what I'm going to be talking about. The episode is going to be all about COVID 19 and mental health. I know that COVID 19 is a repetitive topic, and honestly, I'm tired of talking about it to people, and I'm also tired about hearing about it. It is kind of overdone, but unfortunately, in terms of mental health and COVID 19, nobody has been really talking about it in the sense that traditional media isn't covering it as much as the normal COVID 19 stories. I have seen a couple of social media accounts, I believe, that have spoken about mental health during the pandemic, but not everyone has touched base in this particular topic, which is why I thought it was super important to come around and talk about it today. So, obviously, you guys know exactly what I'm going to be talking about in the episode. So, instead of me rambling on, I'm just going to go ahead and dive in. Okay, so starting all the way in March, when all of this started, in March, I remember it, I think it was about mid March when things started going really, really bad, and there was this fear setting in about the virus. It was a super difficult time, I remember, and also very uncertain time for a lot of people, including myself. Countries were deciding whether they need to lock down or go into lockdown, whether they need to put like policies in place. Flights were very unsure of which direction they were headed, and universities were just about transitioning into this whole aspect of online education. So, March, I think the beginning of everything was a very difficult and uncertain time for a lot of people. And I remember I flew back from Canada and I had no idea what the next 2, 3 weeks meant for me. So, when the whole quarantine phase started and all countries had gone into lockdown by then, the first few days were kind of okay. It just felt like we were taking a break. But later on, I think everyone, including myself, I just realized that the world just stopped. Out of nowhere, somebody just hit pause, and now we didn't know what to do with our lives. We're so used to running this rat race on an everyday basis, getting up, living that hustle life, and working super hard and trying to make ends meet and making your day super productive. And now all of a sudden, you don't know what the next day even holds. And I remember during this time, nobody really took a break in any sense. What I mean by that is like nobody really took a break from work or from school to kind of just, figure out how they feel. And people just kind of rushed into it. And I know that it was a very difficult time and uncertain time to navigate, so not everyone knew exactly what to do, even in terms of mental health. And I understand that completely, but just generally, I feel like we kind of rushed into it and we just started trying to adjust our normal life to this new setting, even though we knew circumstances completely changed. And we still tried running this rat race and still trying to be this productive and living this hustle life and, wake up and slay kind of mindset never really quit us, even when this pandemic kind of set in. And a few weeks into it, I remember realizing that, okay, now this work from home thing is now the new normal. And I know a lot of people started realizing it, businesses themselves, even friends, students. I mean, whatever life that you live, you knew that work from home has now become the new normal. And so now, okay, we had all this free time, from work. Okay, we did like our calls, meetings, and all of that. And then after there was just so much free time, and everyone was just trying to make it productive, including myself, especially students, because essentially we transition into summer by then, and everyone's like, oh my god, like now we can't go anywhere, we can't travel, we can't work at any place. So now everyone's trying to find virtual internships, people are registering for online courses, and people are trying to get fit and get like fitness into their regimen sitting at home, and all of these things are happening, and everyone is rushing into this productivity race. I also remember during this time, I think this was around, I'd say May. It's probably May by now at this time. I saw a lot of Instagram creators, YouTubers come out with content like how to be more productive, or like how to make quarantine productive, how to focus for 10 hours straight at home. And all of these videos started coming out, and even a lot of motivational speakers, whether they're on Instagram, YouTube, or whatever, I would see a lot of them talk about how you need to make the most of the time you've got. When people come out of this quarantine, some people are going to be 10 steps ahead of you, and you're going to fall behind if you don't keep up. You need to keep pushing yourself, you need to keep motivating yourself, you need to keep doing what you're supposed to do. And so my realization was that there is this pressure for productivity, and this idea that we have to constantly be productive when we have a lot of time on our hands. And this definition of productivity was defined by the idea of capitalism. And I know that sounds super complicated, but it's really not. So basically, what I mean by this is that capitalism, and specifically capitalistic productivity, always taught us to achieve results, get results, and those results have to be tangible in order for it to be considered productive. For instance, you had to, if you were at a job, you had to get a presentation done by the next week because that's a tangible result of what you did. If you're a student, then a tangible result would be to do half a research paper, and that would be counted as productive. Whereas, on the other hand, something like self care would not be productive because self care isn't tangible, right? It's not that if you meditate today, tomorrow you're going to show some signs of improvement immediately. It's something that happens internally on a mental level that you can't exactly measure in terms of tangible result, which is, I think, completely wrong. And I don't believe in that. I don't think we need to associate this idea of productivity with only the capitalistic definition of it. We have to recognize that working on ourselves, whether it's meditating, reading a book, listening to music, lying down, staring at the ceiling, whatever is helping us deal with our mental health and our mental circumstances counts as productive, and it's completely valid. The other thing that I realized is circumstances can definitely bring you down. That is, like living within a pandemic can definitely bring you down, even if there are no visible signs of anxiety or stress or loneliness. What I mean by that is you don't have to actually be feeling tension all the time, or you should not, have to suffer panic attacks or anxiety attacks for you to know that you are stressed, or for you to know that you are anxious during this time. Your anxiety or your stress could even be as simple as not being able to sleep properly at night. It could be just not feeling like doing work, don't feel like getting up in the morning. I mean, it could be really anything. But I think we need to acknowledge the fact that during this pandemic, all of us can feel differently at different points in time. Some days we might feel great, some days we may not feel so great because of the circumstances, because of the pandemic. Even if we're not working in the front line, or we're not, actively participating in COVID-19, like research or helping out in any form, it is very normal for you to feel anxious and lonely and withdrawn, given the fact that we are social distancing, we are staying away from our usual lives. And I think that's something that we have to recognize. So, in this entire time, when I'm talking about productivity, I definitely don't mean to discourage you from being productive. I think if you genuinely feel like working on an internship or doing schoolwork is helping you cope with the situation, is helping you take your mind off things and helping you live a normal life, then go ahead and do it. And I'm in no way trying to discourage that aspect of productivity. All I'm saying is that the pressure of productivity is unrealistic and unnecessary at a time like this. It is completely your choice if you want to be productive or not. It shouldn't be a forced act, is all I mean from this conversation of pressure of productivity. I think it is completely okay to take a break sometimes. It is okay to do what you want to do. It is absolutely fine that in the entire day, all you achieved is getting out of bed, um, or your biggest achievement during the day was brushing your teeth, having breakfast. It could be as small and simple as that. But I think we need to acknowledge that anything that we do during the day is taking a lot of mental effort, and it is okay if things don't pan out the way that they were supposed to. It's fine if we had a schedule and we did not do anything on that today, and it is totally okay if you're not quote unquote productive today. I think we also need to normalize focusing on yourself. We need to normalize self care as productive. And we need to get rid of this pressure of being a certain kind of productive, if you know what I mean. So I think during this pandemic, there are a lot of things that we need to reevaluate, and this productivity pressure is something we definitely need to focus on, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today. A very interesting incident actually happened with me very recently. I think it was a couple of days ago, and I needed to talk about it because it was definitely relevant to both the segments I'm going to be covering in the podcast. So, there was a post that was put out by a very famous journalist about exams during the pandemic and how a certain university in my city, in Bangalore, I'm not going to name them, is still conducting exams even though the government has advised against it, I believe. And how students were protesting against it because they felt like they couldn't focus, or there's a lot of stress and anxiety in the atmosphere right now, and it's just not the time to be thinking about exams and prioritizing exams over students' mental health. So I came across this post, and there was a comment on it. It was by a girl who studies at this university and who was pro exams. Essentially, her argument was that the exams are a reward for her learning experience, and it makes her more competent, and that life is hard for everyone, so everyone should just suck it up and deal with the situation. And while of course she's entitled to her own opinion, and I feel like, okay, if that's what she believes in, that's totally fine. I happened to chime in, and I gave her a bit of my opinion as well about how she completely forgot the role of privilege here. And I did discuss this on my Instagram story, so if you are from there and if you're listening, then you're probably familiar with what I'm talking about. My reply to her was very simple. It was essentially saying that, if taking exams during a pandemic shows how privileged you are and how lucky and fortunate you are to be focusing on exams while the world is essentially going through a crisis. And so that brings me to my next segment, which is about privilege and mental health during this pandemic. So, privilege has always existed and it's always played a role in society. However, the pandemic has made that more apparent and brought that to the forefront of the conversation, where we see directly the inequalities in terms of access to online education, or access to food, access to water, access to healthcare. And all of these gaps are now becoming very wide and very apparent. So that is why the context of privilege in the pandemic is super important, because it has shown something that is also very important in terms of mental health. There's another story that I ended up seeing on Instagram. I use Instagram very often, and so I happened to see this. There were a lot of celebrities during, I think, the very beginning of the lockdown, maybe around April, were tweeting were posting on Instagram, posting videos on how they're so upset about the situation, on how stressed they feel, or how they can't sleep at night, or how anxious they're feeling, and how sad they are that their project got cancelled, or how excited they were because one of their shows were going to release, and essentially talking about how a lot of them are struggling during this time as well. I happened to read the comments in a lot of these posts, and I was actually really shocked to see what people had gone and commented on these posts. I remember clearly a comment said, "You can't be crying about your life if you're living in a $24 million house." And of course, it's funny at first when you read it, but to think that you can limit someone's emotions and feelings to the fact that they are financially well off is completely missing the point of mental health. And so that's why I wanted to talk about mental health and privilege, because I saw all of these things happening and I was like, this is not how we're supposed to address these issues. Mental health is for everyone. It does not discriminate based on your net worth or your political beliefs or your skin color or your choices or religion or your ethnicity. It is literally for everyone. Everyone is allowed to feel a certain way. Everyone is allowed to feel sad. Everyone's allowed to feel angry. Everyone's allowed to feel stressed, anxious, everything. And it is really sad to see that we talk about mental health on social media so openly, but at the same time, we bash people for feeling human. Of course, I understand the argument that, oh, but like celebrities have access to whatever they want, so how can they feel bad? Well, the argument's not completely wrong, but it is still flawed in a certain sense, and I'll explain why. While I understand that their privilege and their social standing allows them access to therapists very easily, they can afford therapy very easily, they have friends, family willing to help them out, they have assistants, they have managers looking after their work, they have the option of sitting back and not doing their job and not getting affected because they have that much money. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you disqualify their feelings because of the way they are or because of the access that they have. Definitely, they have the upper hand in terms of improvement, in terms of healthcare, and in terms of doing something about their mental health situation. But that doesn't mean you can blame them for how they feel because of what they're worth. And I think this applies to everyone. If I, for example, am struggling with something mentally, and if somebody on the road who is poor, who's homeless, is also struggling with something mentally, they are both important and they are both valid. While my situation, my privilege allows me to access care and like access resources, that does not mean my situation is better slash worse than the person who is homeless. Definitely considering the fact that this supposedly homeless person does not have access to resources, of course, that is a very important and valid point, and mental health is a concern in that case. However, comparing someone's mental health to somebody else's mental health simply in terms of how much they own or how much money they have is totally missing the point of mental health in general. The point is, everyone is allowed to feel the way that they feel. Everyone's feelings are valid, no matter which place you stand in society, where you stand, and how high you are or how low you are in social standing. They are all very important, and we need to start addressing them as it is. We need to start being kind, empathetic. We need to understand that everyone's struggle is their own struggle and that we do not know the full story and we do not have the right to comment or taunt how they feel. I think it is extremely sad and extremely shocking to see that people out there are willingly commenting on celebrities' Instagram posts and saying that, oh, there are bigger things than your feelings, because that is not the point of mental health. While that may seem like a very valid point at first, I think we need to reevaluate the way we talk about mental health on all levels, whether it's rich, poor. We need to address mental health equally for all. We need to take into account each one's circumstances and still empathize with them and understand where they're coming from. regardless of their social situation, because everyone truly has their own struggles. So, for me to talk about privilege and mental health is just to make sure that we are more mindful when we comment on people's pictures, because it does affect them, or when we talk about it in, in conversations, or when we talk about it in traditional media. I think we need to start being a little more careful and mindful of what we say and how we say it, because no matter where you are or who you are or where you're from, mental health affects everyone, and we need to treat that as it is. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the very first episode. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, if you have any feedback, suggestion, questions, comments, please feel free to message me on my Instagram handle. It is in the description below. I hope you have an amazing day. Until next time, take care.